Welcome to Time to Talk Science and Medicine, a new podcast designed to highlight translational researchers from Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario. The main goal of these podcasts will be to focus on the researcher, find out where they've come from, what motivates them, and how their research will change the world. We also try to find out a little bit about the person behind the dangerous idea, what makes their research world-class. My name is Dr. Charlie Heimarch, and I'm a genomics researcher and faculty member at Queen's University.
And my name is Dr. Stephen Archer, and I'm a cardiologist and researcher and also the director of the Translational Institute of Medicine, or TIME, here at Queen's. Today, we're joined by Dr. Adrian Baranchuk, who's a cardiologist and an electrophysiologist here at Kingston General Hospital. Dr. Baranchuk is a friend and colleague, and he's the editor of the Journal of Electrocardiology. He's contributed an amazing 700 scientific publications to the world's literature. And very excitingly, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this, is the president of SEAC. And I'll let you wait and have Adrian tell you what SEAC is, but it's very important to this conversation. So Dr. Baranchuk, thank you for coming into our podcast today. Before we get too deep into your clinical and scientific interests, I'd like to find out about what motivated you to become a cardiologist. What's your origin story?
Thank you very much for having me here to have the opportunity to chat with both of you. I consider you colleagues and friends, and it is an honor for me to be able to share this time with you. So, Dr. Archer, I am the son of a doctor mom and a doctor dad. So I'm not sure if there was some influence in my decision to become a doctor, because I dedicated most of my life to music. And during my teenager years, I was deeply involved in music. And one day I woke up and I said to myself, I would like to be a doctor. And that started a new path to me. And for the first few years of my career and the university in Buenos Aires, Argentina, I was convinced that I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And around half of med school finished, I realized that I wanted something that could keep me on my toes more frequently. And this is how I found cardiology. And from that point, I embraced a career towards cardiology initially in Argentina.
So you wanted to be a musician. Were you going to be one of those sultry Spanish guitar playing musicians, or what kind of musician were you?
So I was a piano player. I was playing at home, and my mother got sick, but still had to see some patients at home. So I am playing, and one patient is crossing the corridor, and he introduces himself. He was a neurosurgeon, and he said, the band of my son is seeking for a piano player. And I said, and what music do they do? And he said, well, they do heavy rock. I had no idea what that was. And I said, yeah, let's do it. So this is before cell phones and all the stuff. And I contact them and I take the bus to the place where they were rehearsing. And 3 blocks from the place, I can start hearing the music. And that was too loud for me. That was the beginning. We played together for 4 years. We had a band called Viva Retro, which became quite famous at some point, and we were playing 2-3 times during the week. I mean, playing professionally 3-4 times during the nights of the week. So school went a little bit to the side to me for those years. And I thought that I was going to have a music career. Indeed, these guys today are called Los Pericos, like the parrots in English. And they are traveling the world for the last 40 years playing reggae music. And they are the most famous band of playing reggae in Spanish.
Well, that's fantastic. That's a real turnabout from cardiology to rock star. How many people were you playing to if you were doing professional gigs? So our classic stuff was in the ballpark of 2,000 to 3,000 people. We play stadiums with I don't know how many people. And then we were also eager to play in every place that we were invited. So something very interesting is there was a bar quite far from home, but they wanted us to play every Saturday night. So for a year, we were going to this place
and playing and rocking the place, destroying the place. And the owners were very happy because they had the bar full of people.
You had a residency there, effectively.
Yeah, here you go. So it was a very nice period of my life. And I thought that was going to be my future. And then things change.
Well, before we turn it over to Dr. Hindmarch, I'm really sorry about your fall from grace, and now you're just a lowly cardiologist when you could have been a rock star. But anyway, it's nice to know that all careers are not straight lines. So I think, Charlie, you were going to ask.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about your dangerous idea. And on this show, we define a dangerous idea of is something that, if it was true, would change the world and would move your field on. So what's your dangerous idea?
So there are plenty, because I like to take on challenges. But within SIAC, that we will talk later about that, we are moving the center of our attention for people developing cardiovascular diseases from the elderly and people above 75 years of age. Then we move to the 50s, then to the 40s. What we are interested now is to move into primary infancy, ages 3 to 5, because we think that some of the aspects that will trigger whether you are going to develop some certain cardiac diseases are played during the primary infancy. And if we are right in this observation, it may happen that we can induce some modification in what is being the social component of the life of very young kids.
Well, before we get into that interesting primary prevention idea, let's hear more about SIAC. So spell it out, tell us what it is in Spanish and in English, and what's the dangerous idea around being president of SIAC?
SIAC is an acronym in Spanish for the Inter-American Society of Cardiology. This is a society of societies. That means that from Canada to Argentina, the Caribbean, and Spain, every cardiovascular society is a member of SIAC. In our case, in Canada, the Canadian Cardiovascular Society is one of the members of SIAC. And the role of SIAC in education and investigation is the development of platforms that allows countries with different languages, with different social backgrounds, with different economies, to be integrated, to have plans that can help in developing educational platforms that are useful for everybody. In investigation is to serve and facilitate connection between investigators of different regions of the continent in order to advance knowledge that is productive for countries like Peru and Bolivia, Canada, and the Caribbean, right? And finally, our role in advocacy is regularly meeting with legislators of different parts of the continent and of the world, because we are expanding this to certain countries in Europe, to provide data on realities that are a little bit outside of the things that we commonly know. And that can help legislators to consider taking or implementing actions that could help the cardiovascular health of our communities.
That's really it's an impressive system that you're kind of building together, and so kind of standardization of practice that moves across the continent, presumably, and leadership. But also, what about language? Because of course we don't all speak the same languages. Is that a component of the work that you do?
That is definitely a challenge, and where there is a challenge, there is an opportunity. And I took this sentence from one of my mentors that is sitting at this table, Dr. Archer, where he can help me transforming what is a challenge into what is an opportunity. And most of the universal guidelines are written in English by economies that can support the performance of an idea, which is sustainable only if you have certain degree of economic resources. And this may not be applicable for countries which do not have that ability. So there is the need of integration of English-spoken countries in North America with the rest of Latin America, and I'm referring from Mexico down to Argentina. And of course, Brazil is a huge challenge. We're talking more than 250 million people, and we are talking possibly the country in all America with the largest amount of cardiologists. How to integrate them if we don't speak their language? So there are different approaches to this. One is that the requisite that we all understand that we need to communicate. And the fact that English may be the language that integrates the world is not enough for certain people living in Latin America to accept that knowledge will come in that frame. So one of our actions is to transform this into opportunities. We meet, we speak Spanish, we translate immediately to English and Portuguese. We do educational platforms. If it is generated in Brazil, it comes in Portuguese, translated to Spanish and English simultaneously.
So you're kind of like a cardiology babelfish.
Kind of.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting, and I'm guilty of this. I went to a meeting, a SIAC meeting in Miami, and it is very interesting when you're the English-speaking guy in a room and you suddenly realize that everyone else is speaking in Spanish or Portuguese and they understand each other and now you don't understand. And I think we're guilty, or some of us are guilty, I'm guilty, passively, of assuming that people will understand what we've written in English and apply it. And being at a meeting like that, you realize this knowledge, A, may be derived in Spanish-speaking languages, so they have their own knowledge creation, but the knowledge that we create has to be in one of the languages they speak or it won't help. And I think this issue about resources, like there's no point recommending cardiac MRI for a country that is struggling to provide entry-level healthcare. And so I think having the guy, I was really sort of evangelized by going to the meeting and recognizing this. But it's not just a one-way street, right? I mean, this is not charity from English countries supporting a Spanish organization. This is a grassroots Spanish-speaking organization that is also influencing us in the English-speaking parts of North America, I understand.
All the observations are correct. And this is exactly how SIAC is envisioning the future. So meetings in person are relatively easy because we can go with automatic translation into the three languages. That has a cost, and a cost that the society can afford. We have created now the Inter-American Society of Cardiology journal that we call RIAC by its acronym in Spanish. And we are moving from Spanish to all papers have to be presented in either Spanish or English, and the editorial has to translate and authors have to approve the second version. But that leaves Brazil outside. And Brazil is a market in terms of amount of people that needs to be educated that is quite large. So we are discussing whether we have to have our version in Portuguese and how this affects indexation of the journal. But that means that the more we open the possibility for everybody to understand what we are saying in every single language, the more people will embrace the idea of what is needed in terms of education, in terms of research, and in terms of implementation of politics that will improve healthcare in our communities.
Interesting. There used to be a bit on NPR when I lived in Minnesota back in the 80s, which featured a comedian saying, use English and be understood. And maybe your dangerous idea could almost be rephrased as use the language of the people you're talking to and be understood. And that has tremendous sort of transformational powers and might be the dangerous idea, which is that Spanish is going to be, and Portuguese are going to be necessary if we want to be interacting with Latin America.
So you're so right. And I had an experience that reflects what you said. Couple of years ago, I was invited to Sao Paulo, that is in the south of Brazil. It's a huge town with millions of people there.
33 million for the population.
Here, just Sao Paulo. And the presentation was being recorded live for public TV. And for these reasons of music and life, Argentina is so close to Brazil that I was educated both in Spanish and Portuguese, but basically by music. And I decided to deliver my presentation in Portuguese. My Portuguese is a mix of Portuguese and Spanish, so we call it Portuñol, which is Portuguese and Espanol. And I go there, and I finish. It went very well. They gave me a soccer shirt with the number 10 in the back from the Brazil selection. That refers to Pelé, the famous soccer player, but with my surname in the back.
Awesome.
And the comment that this person that is thanking me and giving me this gift to the public, it was 500-600 people live plus people on TV, was, "You have no idea how much value we gave to your attempt to present in Portuguese, even when my slides were in English, because I thought I was going to do it in English," right? And that was the first comment that he made, indicating that you're right. People appreciate when you do your best to communicate in the best possible manner for them to understand.
So if the dangerous idea is around medicine, language, and research being moved back and forth across North America by Spanish and Portuguese, how would you explain this dangerous idea to a high school student? So you've told us about your ideas, but about guidelines and the importance of communicating in someone's language, but how would you explain this to a high school student?
So the first thing that I could try to say, it depends how much time I have, right? But remember that the best way of communicating is you doing your best for the person that you want to communicate to understand what you're saying. Then there is a little bit of history behind this, which is part of the continent was somehow attempted to be invaded by different cultures. And the nature, the individuals that were living in those regions defended their culture and their belonging to a geographical area, to their culture, religion, and even language. So we do not need to convince people to speak our language. What we have to do is to learn the language that they speak, to facilitate communication, and to be able to implement changes that we know that can improve a community and adjust those changes to culture, religion, and socioeconomic status. You mentioned something very nicely and rapid, that if I said, for this condition, you need a cardiac MRI, I'm leaving out 60% of people in the continent that will not have access to that. So one thing is to teach to doctors, in an ideal situation, to fix this problem, you need a cardiac MRI. But if what you only have is a stethoscope and an ECG, then you can do this and you can do that. And then you're speaking their language because they can apply that. And something that is universally happening is that the international guidelines are being adjusted to low and medium income countries' situation, because otherwise we spread out and teach something that is not applicable in certain parts of the world, and we leave those people with no other options.
And it's interesting, I don't want to get all cardiology on the audience, but you gave me an example before of a drug that is not recommended in the North American guidelines, but is the only drug available in South America.
Yeah, for a condition called pre-excited atrial fibrillation, which is a rapid rhythm of the upper chamber of the heart that is conducted through an accessory pathway. For ages in many parts of the world, a drug called amiodarone was used to terminate that tachycardia. In the last North American European guidelines, this drug got a category of C. That means it's contraindicated. So what we did is looking into, well, what triggered that decision? And it's based on few case reports here and there. So before we start challenging that, we wanted to know, well, in Latin America, which drug is being used from these 6 that we have in North America, which is not amiodarone? And to our surprise, 85% of the centers in Latin America, the only drug that they have to treat this condition is amiodarone. So if we say no to that and we don't give an option to that, then patients may not receive the care that they need, and is life what is at the stage here.
Thank you for that. That's a great actual working example of the importance of the communication and setting clinical standards that are actually appropriate across geographical domains. So, can you tell us about your latest discovery and how it's going to impact the work that you do, and especially within the context of this organization? You know, like what's coming up? What have you just done that's kind of been a major kind of milestone for you?
Thank you for this question, because that gives me the opportunity to talk about the NetHeart project that we developed in the last few years within the structure of the Inter-American Society of Cardiology. In SIAC, we have an Emerging Leaders program, which is people from health sciences, life sciences, to the age of 35, young cardiologists that come to SIAC with passion to develop educational platforms or research. And we created the NetHeart project, which is neglected tropical diseases affecting the heart. These are a series of conditions. Some of them, people that is listening to the program may be familiarized, like, for example, tuberculosis. Despite that, we have very little or almost no tuberculosis in Canada. This is still a problem in large parts of the world. If we think that in the last 7 years, we had 5 million people migrating to Canada from India, East Asia, Africa, and Latin America, some of the diseases that I'm going to mention today became now of interest in Canada, because we are going to see in our clinics people with these conditions. And they are things like Chagas disease. Only in the US, we have 350,000 people living with this condition that can affect the heart. As conditions that are more common to Canadians, like Lyme disease or dengue or Zika or chikungunya, these are viruses, parasites, bacteria that affect the body and can also affect the heart and the cardiovascular system. So the project of the NetHeart started by reviewing in detail each one of these conditions and how they affect the heart. For example, malaria and heart got published in a very high impact factor journal, like the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, and the first author was Shaila Gupta, at that time a health science student from Queens. And she's the daughter of a very famous cardiologist in Mississauga, Dr. Gupta, who has an amazing career, but he doesn't have a first author paper in JACC. His 19-year-old daughter has one. So that gives the opportunity for very young individuals with passion for research to understand the structure on how you see an idea and you move from an idea to a methodology of how you're going to research that, to implementation, to interactions with the editorial world. To make a summary of the NetHeart project, it reached at this point 23 papers in high impact factor journals and a book published by Elsevier March 2022, something like that, called the NetHeart book, where the co-coordinators and most of the co-authors were members of the Emerging Leader program of SIAC. So where is the NetHeart now moving after achieving those goals? Given these new immigration patterns in Canada, in the US, and in Europe, where some of these conditions are almost non-existent, so the training of our Canadian doctors do not cover these instances, we want to bring pieces that says neglected tropical diseases in Canada, consequences of the new immigration pattern. Why is that? Because now you're going to see diseases that manifest in the first 3-6 months, acute or subacute conditions in people now living in Canada. So you have to be prepared to know that if a person comes from a certain region of the world, those diseases are prevalent, and here in Canada, we have the ability to diagnose them, but only if we think about them. If we don't think about these diseases because these are not Canadian problems, we will never arrive to the diagnosis and the proper treatment. But the other thing is also true. Patients that are coming to see us, that came from those regions and have spent now years, could have chronic conditions that are very common in their original places and not common in Canada. And if we don't know for each region what are those conditions and how they affect the heart, we may not be able to do the diagnosis.
Yeah, it's a very interesting area because I know in my clinic, I see patients that have come from all around the world, and often they have very overt cardiovascular disease. And the main thing I take from that is whatever screening process we're using, not only will it not detect tropical infectious diseases or things like Chagas or tuberculosis very well, but it certainly doesn't even detect structural heart disease. And I know my wife would kill me if I didn't mention this, but her name's Kathy Delisney, and she did her PhD in epidemiology and did her master's here at Queen's. It was on the impact of people migrating, the boat people migrating to Canada, and showed, because I think there's a real danger of stigmatizing people if they come with diseases, but we all have diseases. And so it's not so much about fearing the other or fearing the immigrant. This is about, you have to be informed enough to recognize that if you're coming from Buenos Aires, you might have been exposed to dengue, which is endemic in the area. And so it behooves you to be aware of fever in someone coming from, even though it's a very cosmopolitan city, might be something other than COVID.
That is so correct. And thank you for bringing the challenge of stigmatization, because this is something that can occur and has occurred in the past, that if you look like, then you are this or that. This is different because, for example, to explain to the audience, a person comes and we detect that the heart is dilated. The most common reason in the entire world is the obstruction of the coronary arteries. If we rule this out, then in Canada, we call it non-ischemic cardiomyopathy. Cool, that is true and it's correct. But if you belong to certain regions of the world, that dilated cardiomyopathy could be a consequence of a long-term infection that you could diagnose and eventually treat. Some of these conditions have specific ways of evolve and specific ways of being treated. So rather than stigmatization, what I could say is, listen, you're coming from this part of the world where this condition is frequent. I'm going to do a blood test to determine whether you have this. And you call the patient and says, please come to see me because you do have this condition and we're going to do this. We transform an opportunity of stigmatization in an opportunity to help quality and quantity of life for an individual.
So that's cool. I'm not a clinician, but I am a patient from time to time, and obviously I'm from the UK, and I don't know whether it's different here, but in primary care, if you ever present with anything, and I had Giardia once in the UK, and they said, "Have you been away anywhere?" I said, "I was in Sao Paulo 3 weeks ago." About a week later, I get a call from public health requesting more information to basically build a case. And I said, why are you asking these questions? And they're like, we're building and mapping how immigration and travel patterns might influence disease caseloads in the UK. So I assume it's the similar sort of thing that you were trying to bring to Canada.
This is the approach. Most of these conditions are not contagious. So there is no, danger to the population, and that reduces the risk of stigmatization, because basically when we see political, religious stigmatization, they, even when it is absolutely wrong, they are based on the fear of certain communities to be contaminated with ideas, cultures, or diseases that do not belong to that region. In this case, the neglected tropical diseases, most of them are not contagious. So there's no risk for anybody, only for the person that carry this disease, and only for the doctors that are sitting doing their best, but without the knowledge tools that will help them guiding to a specific diagnostics or treatment.
So what would the big three be if you were to say the big three tropical diseases that you're likely to see in Canada that affect the heart?
So I could say that for sure, Chagas disease has to be, the detection has to be improved. We do have in Kingston and in Canada in general serology to determine this. Since I've been here in Kingston, I used it 5 times, and at least 2 or 3 times the test was positive, giving me the opportunity to follow up these patients with Chagas. I think that we still need to do better with Lyme disease. Lyme disease is endemic for the southeastern region. There are a lot of gaps in knowledge, and there's a lot of gaps in patient care that need to improve. And one of them, with no doubts and without making any enemies, is more education. We need to provide more education to family doctors, to ear doctors, and to cardiologists to explain how frequently the heart and the cardiovascular system can be involved.
Are you advocating for, sorry to interrupt, but are you advocating for TikTok?
So, yeah, maybe that's a good idea.
Sorry, I apologize.
Can we cut that?
No, it stays in.
I love it. So this morning, and without making names, I got an email from a physician of Nova Scotia, and her daughter is having Lyme problems, and she's reaching out without knowing me for some help and directions. So this is an active problem that requires way more attention. And from a cardiovascular point of view, we keep quoting that 5 to 10% of people with Lyme disease has cardiac diseases, but we don't test people. You have Lyme disease, you're going to receive your antibiotic. It's a $1 diagnostic test called ECG that takes 5 minutes to take for us to determine whether the patient is suffering a heart component of this disease, right? So I would put Lyme for sure. And I could say that the third place could be shared between tuberculosis, dengue, and malaria.
Yeah, and certainly just an acknowledgement, we have, not the topic of today's conversation, but we have a lot of tuberculosis in northern Canada. So it's not just coming in from other countries, but we have tons of TB in the north and amongst Indigenous people. And that's something we don't do a great job of managing already. But so now, Adrian, I know it sounds like you've accomplished a lot, but every scientist or physician has some, or person for that matter, has bumps in the road. Have you had a bump in the road in your career as a clinician and researcher?
I know that we have limited time, so I don't want to your audience to be too bored with so many examples. But I'm just going to reflect on the impact of immigration, of living your culture, your language, your way of facing medicine and the development of your career. While objectively, I am a very, very happy person with an opportunity to develop all my research interests in this institution. I initially came to Canada and I spent 2.5 years in McMaster, and then I had several options, and I chose Queens, knowing very little, but very impacted by Kingston as a city. And then it happened that my objectives and my wishes and my desires were able to be accomplished in this city. But that is living quite far from Argentina, where the rest of my family is, where my culture and the way of being is, and where I have studied and created so many close relationships. So when I like to have an Argentinian coffee in the way that we take it, yeah, I have to drive to downtown in Kingston because finally I found a place that the coffee is quite similar to what I have. But I'm using that as an example that emigrating from your place to have a better life, a safer life, and more opportunities to develop your wishes, your economy, brings also a bump in the road, which is you are going to always miss some aspects of your life and the culture and country that you were born.
Yes, it is interesting. It's never easy to be a stranger in a strange land, and no matter how welcoming people are, things like language, coffee, the aromas of nature, all those things are a little bit different in every country. So
I think the fact that they call it soccer, not football, I think that's one of the big...
Get over it. Get over it, Charlie.
No, what you say absolutely resonates. I think, Stephen, you've lived away, you've lived outside of England, outside of Canada as well. And I think that we all kind of understand that it's a double-edged sword. You take a bunch of benefits and there's some risks and there's some, you miss an awful lot about your own
and they
culture.
become part of your life and your memories are part of your... So something that happens to me when I drive to KGH and I see the lake, and there is a family of wild turkeys that I am convinced that they come to say hi every morning to me, right? I mean, I'm going through the car and in a loud voice, I'm just waving hi to them and we say goodbye.
You say hello to the turkeys too, me too.
And that is part of my last 20 years. If I move out of Kingston one day, I'm going to miss that terribly because that's part of my current life, right?
My experience is there are turkeys everywhere, Adrian, so you'll be all right.
Here you go.
Adrian's turkeys.
That's right.
Okay, so thank you for covering the bump of the road. I think that resonated with me especially. But what's next for you? What's next for SEAC? What's coming down the road for Dr. Baranchuk?
So I just came back from Mexico City where we hosted our annual meeting. 2,100 people attended the meeting. We are taking a breath from what was the organization of that. I took with me, for example, my swimming shorts. I couldn't use them, not even in the swimming pool of the hotel. It was back-to-back meetings, walking from one meeting to the other, 6 times interrupted to discuss different things with different people. It was quite intense. And our next meeting, it is June 2025 in Cartagena de Indias in Colombia. So we're giving ourselves a break until July the 1st where we start preparing all these. But even during this break is not less than 80 WhatsApps and 20, 30 emails regarding SEAC, right? So I am entering my second year of term and I finish in June where I will take on the presidency of the International Society of Holter and Non-Invasive Electrocardiology. It's a long name, complex, but a much, much smaller community. So now we're working for 150, 250 people around the world. So what's next for me is investigating whether politics at the continental level and my personal ideas of how to move from an idea to implementation are going to be somehow vehiculated towards having to have some leadership roles now more associated with politics than strictly health. So I'm giving myself the next 2 to 3 years to think if that is the way that I want to get older.
That's going to be really exciting. So thank you very much, Dr. Baranchuk, for taking time to speak to us about your clinic and your research and your work with SEAC. But you don't get off that easily. If you've listened to the show before, we tend to try and find out a little bit more about you as a person and not as a cardiologist. And I think we've covered some of the stuff, but I have a special question that I've just come up with, which is why I stole the floor for this. If you were a rock star, which rock star are you going to be?
Well, I hope he listens to this.
Sure he does.
The leader of Los Pericos is Juanchi Valeiron. And Juanchi is an incredible human being. And he gave me the opportunity to be the cardiologist of the entire band because the whole band goes from 55 to 60 years of age. So they need a cardiologist that take care of them. And they are traveling all around the world. So I get calls at 2:00 in the morning to try to help and these kind of things. So I'm sure that he is going to listen to this. And if I could be a leader of the band, I could like to be Juanchi Valeiron.
Okay, I have a more frivolous question. So if you were a cartoon character, what cartoon character would you be?
Oh, that's a good one. And I have to think in a cartoon character that is internationally known. Because if you say that, there is a small girl, 6 years of age, very famous in Latin America called Mafalda, and she was a thinker, and I would like to be like her. Definitely, I would like to be like her. But if you take me to a more international, maybe I would like to be Clark Kent. Not Superman, but Clark Kent, right? having the opportunity to be Superman when you need to, but otherwise being a calm guy with good manners, with good intentions to society, and maybe a journalist for a period of time too.
Well, we'll get you a new pair of glasses for that.
So last silly question. What's your favorite meal, and can you cook it yourself?
Yeah, and I would like to share with the audience that I am well known as Chef Baran for Baranchuk. Chef Baran main dish is called asado, which is barbecuing meat to the Argentinian style. Here in Kingston, several years ago, a new place to buy meat opens because I was bringing my meat from Toronto, where there are two Argentinian places that sell Argentinian, not Argentinian meat, but meat cut to the Argentinian style. And this guy opens his place here in Kingston. And the very first week, in the way back from work, I stop and said, what do you need? Just looking. So I'm looking to the different options. And all of a sudden, I see an Argentinian style of a cat imbibed in a horrible green sauce. But listen, I was driving 250K back and forth to Toronto to buy that cat. So now I see it in front of me. This guy knows how to do that. So I said, excuse me, what's your name? And he says, my name is Albert. I say, Albert, can I get that cut, but without that horrible green sauce? And he looks at me and he says, are you Argentinian or Uruguayan? And I said, I'm Argentinian. How do you know? He says, I just came from New Zealand, where I was serving the Argentinian and Uruguayan community, and the only ones that could like this cat without this horrible green sauce, as you call it, are Argentinians. So let me bring some to you. And that is Pig Olive, that now has two places in Kingston. So I do recommend their meat, and there you can go and say, Adrian said, Albert, do you have the Argentinian cat? And then you give a try to asado.
So just to close on the food front before Dr. Heinmarch wraps things up, you also are interested in enology and wines. So I understand that you have a wine that you're particularly fond of.
So yeah, that was part of incorporating fun to the busy life of doctors that are, in addition to see patients in a clinical way, also do research and education. So through this band, Los Pericos, that were producing their own wine, I had the opportunity to meet a winemaker that is the only Latin American with a wine with 100 Parker points, okay, which is a way to stratify the quality of your wines at an international level. This guy spent 6 months in Patagonia, 6 months in Bordeaux in France with two different bodegues. And I brought the idea of wine at certain doses, at certain amounts, are positive for your cardiovascular system. Despite that, I do recognize that if a person is not drinking, I will never recommend that person to drink based on those benefits, because the chances of that person having problems or drinking more than what we recommend are quite high. So we discussed the link between wine and cardiovascular diseases. And I said, well, my passion is in electrocardiography. And the main signal of the heart is called QRS, which is the electrical signal of the heart. So my first wine was a Malbec from the Patagonia region in Argentina called QRS. And then the thing started moving more and more. So we did QT, which is the signal that shows the recovery of the heart. So QT went out there, and also a Malbec. And then we decided to do P-wave, which is the signal that shows the contraction of the upper chamber of the heart. And that was a Cabernet Sauvignon. So with that, I cover all the three aspects of the electrocardiogram. So the fourth wine, which is the first white wine that I've been involved, is called Torrontés. It is a specific white wine from not the Patagonia, but the west region of Argentina. It's called Cuore Argento, which is a mix of slang and Italian-Spanish definition of Argentinian heart, which is what I have within my chest.
Well, I'm glad you stopped short of asystole or sudden death for wine names.
So for future bottles or future casts. So thank you very much for taking time to speak to us today. We've had a great conversation and we've really enjoyed having you in the studio today. On behalf of Dr. Archer and myself, I'd like to thank the audience for taking time to get to know Dr. Baranchuk, one of Queen's University's translational researchers, and finding out how his research will make positive changes to cardiology research, especially in Latin America. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to know more about Queen's University translational medicine researchers or share this podcast, you can search Time to Talk Science and Medicine wherever you normally look for podcasts.